on the call too. I am Rachel Miller. I'm an urban planner and urban designer at Makers. Really happy to be working with you all on the Aberdeen Comprehensive Plan. And I have two folks from Makers here. Do we all want to introduce ourselves? All right, I'm seeing some head nods from the team. All right. Oh, and head shaking. No, maybe, you know what? It's already 7 minutes after. Let's just get into it. So Katie and Ian are here from Makers. Sam with Leland on the economic side and housing feasibility side. And Nick from Forterra bringing all of their local expertise. And Christina from Petite bringing transportation, capital facilities, and utilities, comprehensive planning expertise. So, as always, we are really happy to be here. What we pride ourselves in doing is working with communities to understand what their hopes and dreams are for their area, and helping them figure out how to get there and what to do about that. So a plan by Aberdeen for Aberdeen is what we hope you all get out of this project. So that's what we're hoping to talk about tonight. We did meet with all of you, I believe, fairly recently. And so some of this may look familiar, so I might go a little bit quickly. So just stop me and slow me down if you need me to go over something again. I'm going to share my screen, so you will pop around and not be able to see each other as well for a little while. All right, is everybody seeing the presentation? Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, so what we're trying to get out of today is to make sure we all understand generally what a comprehensive plan is, your vision and goals for Aberdeen, try to confirm what we've heard so far and maybe hear a little bit more about that. And then we have a few specific questions where we don't feel like we have enough direction, or we've heard a couple different ideas, and so we want to hear more about them. So we have a long agenda, a 2-hour meeting with you all to go over what a comprehensive plan is, remind you all of some of the background research that we did, kind of a mirror of Aberdeen, looking at what we understand about your community. And then a little discussion about general visioning over the next 20 and 50 years, what's most important to you all. And then looking at some draft materials and then what our questions are about them. And then the idea is to break up into small groups. And I think we actually have enough people to do small groups. So we'll break up by topics. So be thinking about these topics as we go through. Later on, I'll ask you to actually chat Ian to let us know what topic group you want to be in. And then we'll come back together and have a group discussion about what we learned from each other, and add to that, and then talk about some next steps. So where we are in the schedule, it's been a really funky schedule because of COVID. You might remember that we actually took, I think, a full year break from the project entirely, but we are in this visioning and options phase where we have a draft general framework of where we're headed, but there are still a lot of questions to be worked out, and then a lot more details still ahead of us. So you can see we've done quite a bit of talking with people so far. Can people see my arrow when I'm moving my cursor around? Yeah, okay, good.
Yep, we can.
And we just recently launched a survey that you all took a draft version of, or at least most of you did, I think. So that is available and out, and we would love to have far more people completing it. And it'll be similar material as what we talk about today. And then right now we were in the community workshop, and then we have a lot more coming up that I talked about a little bit earlier. So where are we headed? What's the end goal? We are working towards a comprehensive plan. I think we've talked about most of this with you all. Just a reminder, there can be an introduction section with a vision and framework. And then the elements and the topics that we have confirmed with you all are land use, housing, economic development, transportation, capital facilities, and utilities. The ones with the asterisks, the land use and economic development, we do understand that you all would really like a focus on downtown. So those elements in particular, will include a focus on downtown, but it'll actually be supported throughout the comprehensive plan. We have been really working on an urban form concept map with you all. So this is just a reminder of what that's all about. The example on the right is one from Portland, and the example in the middle of the page is one from Marysville that we were working on. And what these do is they set a general framework of what you'd like to see where in your community. And then it helps you figure out all your other policies. Do the other policies help implement that vision? So we are working on identifying neighborhood centers and then corridors, and those mean transportation corridors or pedestrian and bicycle corridors. And they even relate to green elements. So there's often, Portland especially focuses on a system of open spaces, both patches of open spaces and then corridors of green space between them. And then it also helps us define different districts. And I know this is really important to you all, especially with your historic preservation focus. So these districts can have different characters and different land uses designated for them as needed. The elements organization, this is pretty common. The idea here, though, is to be really user-friendly. That's what I'll say about it. And then I can get into background information. So just a reminder, you all are in an incredible region, Grays Harbor, the Olympics, and the Pacific Coast. I mean, it's just really a really amazing environment that you all have around you. There are a lot of assets, and these came from you all and then are also on the survey, and they keep getting supported over and over. I'm not going to read through them because I think you've seen most of them before. And then physically, you have a lot of amazing places on the ground. So wherever you see an asterisk on the map, that's something physical that people have noted a lot of times now, that it's an important thing to Aberdeen. That includes things like the community hospital, Grays Harbor College, downtown itself, the port, the Armory, at least the site, the site is there, and some tourism areas, and of course, regional shopping as well. The access to tourists coming to Aberdeen and through Aberdeen is seen as a major draw as well. And downtown's core, the downtown core itself. So the bones that are there. The access to the water for a variety of uses, whether it's industry, recreation, or views itself, is a really lovely asset that not all communities have. And then just the natural environment around, and the idea that there is a lot of green coming into the city, and wetlands that can be seen as quite an asset, both functionally and even visually. And then another kind of unique thing about Aberdeen is that the city owns a lot of land, and whether that's these parcels that you see in brown, and then some other publicly owned property in kind of a beige color, or a lot of right-of-way throughout the city. There's a lot of public ownership. There are some constraints. So just starting at the top of the map, the purple areas are the steep topography. So that's both an asset and a constraint. It can be beautiful, but it's also physically challenging to get up and down the hills. There downtown, though it has great bones and is a very pedestrian environment, the buildings face a lot of challenges for renovation or redevelopment. The railroad is, I should have mentioned it as a major asset. It's an incredible asset for the port and the industry in the area, but it can be a challenge, especially when considering people walking, biking, rolling through the area, and especially given that we've heard that people would like to see more access to the water. So that's a particular constraint or conflict. Being on the water, and this is common of most waterfront areas like this, is a complex permitting process. And generally a sentiment that there's not a unified vision of what people want in the area along the water. The tourism routes, though lovely because they bring more people through the area, can be hard because traffic is often moving fast. So that can be a challenge for safety and comfort, and as well as getting people to actually stop downtown and use downtown. The existing regional shopping center has a limited relationship to the water, although there are some improvements with railroad access or access over the railroad that'll make that a little easier. And then these flood zones, there are a lot of flood zones that will remain even after the levee goes in place. So we have marked the levee, which is a really nice asset coming in. But there are a handful of flood zones that are shown in this turquoise color throughout the area that we can consider. They mostly align with where there are wetlands designated already. Also, this South Shore Mall is largely vacant. I did also want to mention, we're not doing a hazards mitigation plan, but Aberdeen does have a unique constraint or challenge being in a tsunami area. So just keeping that in mind. And though the levee will do a lot for your more average flooding, it may not do as much for a tsunami. So I'm going to turn this over to Sam for a little bit to talk about. He did a wonderful economic analysis and report, and just going over some of the highlights of what he learned.
Thanks, Rachel. And I think, like you said, everybody has already seen a lot of this, so I'm not going to go into too depth, but and it probably won't come as a surprise to anyone on many of these elements. But really, what our analysis showed was a significant shortage of housing for rental, affordable options, and just general availability across the whole board. Really, we also saw that there was a huge importance placed in terms of economic development on downtown and the port. Those are really the hubs of the commercial and the industrial centers of Aberdeen and the broader region for that matter. We looked a little bit about at the feasibility of different development types, and what that showed was some pretty significant challenges for higher density development types that tend to be a little bit more expensive to build for reasons ranging from parking to additional permitting and just a lot of different lifts there. And so we're really talking about rehabilitation projects, largely being the primary kind of investment type for development and real estate in the near term. But with that said, there are, as Rachel said, there's some pretty significant redevelopment opportunities. So she called out the South Shore Mall, for example, this pretty large waterfront area that may see some pretty significant investment as well. But for those larger developments, we may need a heavier lift on the city's side and its public agency partners as well, in terms of support to get those developments going. But if they do happen, they can be major economic growth opportunities, resulting in new jobs, tax revenue, and growth generally. So to that end, we did see some opportunities for growth, particularly in manufacturing. We looked at the location quotient for manufacturing and some other industries as well, but manufacturing sort of top the list. And then from a retail perspective, Aberdeen is the retail hub of the region. It has a very large trade area, which draws a lot of different customers. But there's still opportunities to capitalize on spending that seems to be what we call leaking out of the area. So particularly in sort of general merchandise and some of the more building types and construction-oriented commercial retail categories. And then just more generally, there's everybody here is on Zoom, right? So there's pretty significant trends that can really be capitalized by the city and the community at large. We're seeing a lot more tech investment in rural areas and in places that have great places to live, that have access to outdoor rec and just a high quality of life such as that in Aberdeen. So, we haven't seen a lot of office development in the last few decades, but some of these emerging trends could be capitalized on, particularly in downtown. So that's all I got.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, so Sam talked a lot about talked about some of these opportunities that I'll mention here as well, but just to see them where they're located, that Armory site is a really interesting one because it's in a more established neighborhood, but is an open site now. The downtown core, of course, has so much going on that infill there is really one way to go. Connecting downtown and the water, that the more we look at it, we realize how challenging that is. It's something that people talk a lot about, but we can learn from you all whether and how that is feasible. And there are certainly other areas where connecting to the waterfront may make more sense. The future levy is a great opportunity for protecting downtown from flooding and something that'll change the economic or the financial feasibility analyses. The waterfront in downtown, actually, this is an old note. We no longer are saying residential development down there. The waterfront south area, because this is still a floodable area, that's one opportunity there, is to let it be what it is and focus your efforts and energy where it makes a lot of sense. The B Street corridor is something we'll reference again when we see the centers and corridors map. That came up as an opportunity corridor for seeing higher density development and leveraging what's already there. And then reconnecting to the waterfront. And this could be a note just where along the whole waterfront where it makes sense. And then the waterfront here, Sam mentioned this area as well. Large area, single property owner, lovely waterfront beaches and everything, and connected to a really interesting old mill site in the Lady Washington area. Sam also mentioned the South Shore Mall. And then throughout, folks that have been involved in the process have mentioned creating livable hubs. So the idea that there could be your grocery store or your park or even just a little coffee shop that you can get to within a 15-minute walk or so, or however you get there. So that trips can be short and easy and comfortable. There's also been some talk about encouraging other types of homes. So not just single family and not just apartments either. And I think Sam mentioned this as well in attracting talent, that having other types of homes and the variety may be really useful. So some people call these missing middle. It could be duplexes, triplexes, very small apartment buildings or condo buildings with just a few units, maybe up to 8 units or so, or accessory dwelling units in backyards, that kind of thing. And then another concept that keeps coming up as well is focusing on places that are outside of flooding areas. So this concept of retreat or the hill. And that's something that we would like to talk with you all more about. As we have also heard, focus on downtown. So they're two diverging, but potentially compatible ideas. So we have talked with most of you all, but I think it could still help to do this larger group discussion and also give us a little break from presentations and hear from you all for a second. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick. And Nick, if you can, let us hear from everybody, what they think is really important over the next 20 to 50 years.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And I want to invite everyone to participate if you've given input before and want to repeat ideas you shared earlier. Maybe your thinking has evolved. And if you haven't contributed before, then I especially invite you to contribute here. So in no particular order, I can't see anyone else right now in my screen layout. But if someone wants to start us off and talk a little bit about what aspects are most important to them over the next 20 this community.
I'll go ahead and start off. This is Councilmember Messias. I would say one of the most important things that I see to bring Aberdeen into the future is housing. We have very little multifamily housing. A lot of the housing you see around here is single family dwellings, and that makes it really difficult for people that might want to come here to, you know, start their education, or our younger generation that wants to maybe go to our community college. They're either going to have to live with their parents, which they're going to college, they want to get out of mom and dad's house, you know, or even people that are interested in moving to our area from one reason or another, but also want to, you know, start or continue their education through our community college. The next thing I would probably put on that list would be, you know, business development. Not entirely in the downtown core, though. It's like I understand there's a lot of concentration on the downtown core, but we have a lot of other areas in our city that can support light commercial, you know, small office complexes, you know, like you said earlier, some coffee shops, or, you know, other you know, light grocery stores that aren't a quickie mart, that actually have, you know, some real groceries that you can, you know, just run down and grab a couple of essentials for dinner or lunch or something like that. You know, I like the idea of having some of that in an area, in parts of our town where you can, you know, just run down there without getting in the car. I might have other ideas, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, so would it be fair to summarize not only housing variety, but you're particularly looking to attract a younger demographic and business development that really focuses on neighborhood vitality? Lovely, thank you. That is wonderful. Other ideas?
This is Liz. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, go right ahead.
Okay, I can only hear you with these pods in my ear, and it's really weird when I hear myself talking too. So I'm also concerned about, I think housing is truly an important focus for us, but at a bigger level, it's planning how we grow with our limited resources. So we've got limited land area, we have limited water supply, and we've got climate change happening, which could work to further reduce the land area that's available, as well as the water that's available to support growth in our community. And with growth also, there's a concern for maintaining affordability, particularly with housing, but also just in general. And my hope, I have several hopes, but a particular hope is that the Maritime Museum area becomes this just amazing magnet hub of mixed use, both housing and destination kinds of places that draw people, restaurants, shops, all sorts of things. I just think that would be really wonderful.
That's great. Thank you, Liz. Would you mind sharing what values you think might reflect those hopes and concerns in looking ahead? from you personally?
It's the value of being in harmony with nature. That's one. Of living in a community that values diversity and yet also values respect and nurturing our community and each other. And supporting local enterprises and developing local opportunities.
Those are great. Thank you.
I'd actually like to expand on one of Liz's values there, where being in harmony with nature. I totally agree with that. I'd just like to expand on that to also, understand that we are stewards of the land, and that in our efforts to grow our community and expand, we also have to be good stewards of this land and pass on to the next generation something that they can grow on, and that they can, take even further than we do right now.
Great points. Thanks for that elaboration.
This is Randy Ross. I'd like to get a clarification on Liz's assertion of the limited water supply. I'm not sure we have a limited water supply. I think we have limited capacity to provide water because we have to upgrade the water system. So we have a large industrial water supply. That's one of our actually good resources to offer for economic development if we can find the right tenant. But unless I'm misunderstanding, it's not that we don't have plenty of water. We have an inadequate distribution system. Can somebody confirm that? Or
if I could respond, Randy, that's you bring up a really good point, that yes, distribution is probably the more limiting factor. But thinking about California, at one time they never would have said we have a limited water supply, and I just don't want to take what we have for granted.
well, my comment, I'll say that's part of the planning and growth process. When you're doing comprehensive planning like this, you plan for what your water capacity is, and that's something that can be identified within the plan.
And Aberdeen does have a water plan which addresses that to some degree, but maybe we create links with the comprehensive plan and all these other plans that help guide us.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, great discussion. Anyone else want to offer their input on any of these questions?
This is Mayor Shave.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, please.
On what's most important, I agree that it's the housing. But one of the things that I'm looking at is we really haven't looked much into the upper end type housing, higher quality housing, which I think has the potential to open the door for a lot of lower income housing. So for places like, for example, just throwing this out, not saying to do it, but the Armory property, if somebody built higher end, upper end housing on that and had space available for, there's folks that would probably move into there and put their house up for sale if we had that. So that's just a thought. I think moving on down the list, what are your hopes? Well, you know, over the years, this community has developed into pretty much up against the hills. And I always felt that technology was capable enough of building housing in the hills and have more property available for industry closer to the water. I would like to, I've always hoped something like that could develop and we could open up some more industrial place. We've had industry question us for locations and we just don't have it. So I think industrial development is would be the biggest factor for improving the welfare of this community. But one of my concerns, I think an awful lot of the downtown buildings are not economically repairable. And so they're a hindrance to new development. Developers don't want to come in and have to tear down this building before they can put theirs up. But I'd like to also add, as long as I got the floor, one of the things that we've been doing so far up to this point, and I don't want to let it pass away just yet, is the neighborhood descriptions that we did with the circles. You know, it took me a while to get a hold of what we were actually doing there. And all of a sudden it hit me that's really important. And it could really make some impressive differences. For example, I didn't even know that the east side over there had an area that was called Wishkah. That's a little bit before my time. And but there's a lot of meaning behind that. If the area where you live had some history and it had a name. Where are you from? Oh, I live in the Wishkah district of Aberdeen. You know, something like that, or the Scammell district, which we're more familiar with. But those are important things. I guess I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. That context on history and identity, that's a good perspective. Thank you, Mayor. Anyone else want to share some input? We've had a couple new arrivals, I think since we began this conversation. So anybody who joined recently wants to chime in, please go right ahead.
I'm actually going to pipe in there really quick and expand on Mayor Shave's comment here, because it's a kind of an interesting one about the meaning and history of the naming of some of the districts and that kind of thing. Because a lot of the naming around here is actually not inclusive of our indigenous population, and there are a lot of the tribes that feel that, you know, they are left out of our community because, well, we don't go out of our way to include them. So I think, you know, doing things that can make this inclusive of the indigenous population and, you know, and look at their history and include that in how we move forward could help bring them back into our community and hopefully mend some wounds that, you know, have been there for, you know, a long time, long before many of us even, you know, came about. And I think that could be, you know, very important to our area and how we move forward in the future.
Thank you, Councilmember. That's a great additional perspective there. Rachel, I just want to check in with you on time. This is a great conversation, but I also want to respect that we have other items on the agenda and more also interesting conversations to have. So I'll pass it back to you if you want to keep going here, great. And if you want to carry on with other topics, let's do that too.
Yeah, let's go ahead and keep going. I really appreciated this conversation. So thanks for recapping, and it's always nice hearing again what's really important to you all and keeping us focused. Okay, so Mayor Shave just mentioned that urban form concept, and those of you who had taken the survey, this will look familiar to you all, but I do want to go over it just for a minute. So one of these things with comprehensive plans is that we're thinking about what population you might expect, but then also what you do about it. And knowing that there are finite resources, where do you focus your energy? So we can't make every place perfect and wonderful and have coffee shops and grocery stores on every street corner. But we can do something, and we can, spark some things in some places. So here is the urban form concept framework. It's still draft. Many of you all helped us develop it. And then it's getting refined each time we talk about it. I think we've had about 3 meetings on this, and the survey is out on it. But the idea here is that there are a few really important regional centers, downtown and the Walmart regional shopping area in that Wishka area that the mayor just mentioned. So those are kind of your regional hubs, and downtown really serves the local community, but also people passing through. And same with that regional center, the shopping center. And then there is the Port District, and that is a major employment hub. Downtown could also be considered an employment hub as well. And there are a couple other little places like the hospital and the college too. But in terms of a major employment district, the Port and a little bit downtown are your big areas. And then in talking about how we might have those places with amenities or a place with a special history that we can really connect to. And what Lisa keeps pointing out is that Aberdeen actually developed this way. This is the way traditional cities happened before cars became the thing. So this is reconnecting to history and identifying some centers where Aberdeen can focus its effort going forward. And if you're in the economics group with Sam later, he can talk more about that, about how focusing can really help spark something. So you see these smaller circles, Fry Creek or the West End, Scammell Hill, Broadway Hill or Uptown, B Street, connected with Arnold Hill, North Aberdeen, and then the East End or Wishka and the Mill District, and South Aberdeen, or Finch Farms. And these two are the ones that could potentially see the biggest change. So they're big open properties up here, and then down here as well, a largely vacant mall with a lot of infill opportunities. So these are building on mostly the framework that's already there, the urban form that's already there. Same with downtown and the East End. But these are where you might actually see a lot of change. So around each of these, that's kind of talking about the center, where there's a park or some kind of anchor that already was there. But around them, there would be districts. And so many of those districts also have historic neighborhoods. And I'll show a slide a little bit later that can show those more easily than what you're seeing here. And then also, Aberdeen is blessed with a lot of natural areas. And one of the things that, for example, the Portland map does is show how you connect from the existing large areas you have and connect those and make some meaningful pathways so that your bees can get around or whatever needs to move around. And also it's a way to think about how stormwater moves and how natural drainage or other techniques can all start to layer alongside your pedestrian paths, just as an example. If you end up joining the group with Christina and Katie in transportation, you will probably talk about these different colored lines that you see here. So the port has special important needs getting freight to and through there. And they need to get there quickly without much impeding their way or hindering their way. So these purple lines show some of the freight routes and railroad tracks that get things to the port. And then some of these green lines are suggesting routes that were either identified in the active transportation plan or seemed important now that there are these neighborhood centers more clearly identified, which were not identified when that planning process happened. So connecting trails that you already have and even connecting those to the regional trail system is something we've heard is important. And of course, the yellow or orangish corridors, some of them do carry some freight as well, but in general, they're more vehicular priority, get people to where they're trying to go, whether they be in a car or a bus or a truck. So now that's the draft that's out there, but we are in this options phase now where there are some questions that have come up and we don't have the answers yet. So that's what this meeting is all about, is trying to understand those questions. So one of them is that we've heard a lot about historic preservation, and we know you have the historic preservation plan. We have also heard about missing middle housing opportunities and a greater variety of housing. Those can be in conflict. So we want to understand what you all mean by historic preservation. How strict is that? Are we talking more about there is a feel to the neighborhood and a functionality that you can walk around and feel like you're a part of a neighborhood, and that things are scaled well for humans, not necessarily for cars? Is that more of the feeling? Or is there like a sense that there's a very strict, this is what's here and that's what must stay, that structure exactly? So that's one of the questions we have there. So that would happen more in the land use and housing group, if that's of interest to you. We have also heard that there is an existing lovely residential neighborhood here between the port and the highway, but there has been talk at the city in the past and even in this process that we need more industrial land. And so one of the obvious things is, well, right by the port, it's already industrial. So what is the future vision for this area? And we could extend that to also the existing commercial here and what happens around it. So again, that'll be in the land use and housing options. It could also be in the economic development group as well, talking about that. And then South Aberdeen, this has come up a lot. Sam mentioned it, I mentioned it. This area right by the water, big site. And really, I mean, what caught my eye when I took this little shot here was these beautiful beaches over here. So what is the vision for this? And then we've talked a lot about housing. And what I notice when I look at the existing zoning map is all the yellow. So that means single family residential. So there may be some flexibility built in already, and there may be more flexibility that could be built in. So really understanding that, and that's a conversation that's happening statewide, is what do we do with all this single family zoning when what we really need is more variety and options for people. So that's a big question here. And then there's some other things that tie into that, the design of housing. There's a big movement right now that if the housing is not designed well, then it can actually lead to greater isolation, especially during COVID, this came up. So the design of housing, and then also this concept of retreat and what really makes sense given the flooding risks and potential tsunami risks. And then in the transportation group, again, you'll probably be talking about what modes should be prioritized where. And then there's also something that comprehensive plans, if you are planning under growth management, which Aberdeen is not, so you don't have to do this, you would be setting level of service standards for your streets. So level of service means that you decide what is acceptable. Most cities traditionally have measured that by how long a car has to wait at an intersection or how long it takes for that car to get through a corridor. So that would be their level of service. They decide an amount of time that's acceptable for a car to wait. There is a big shift to focus on moving people rather than single occupancy vehicles. So I'm curious where Aberdeen stands on that spectrum and what should be prioritized where. And so you can join Christina and Katie's group if you're interested in that topic, and that'll be transportation. And then also while you're talking about that, and this is a question we put on the survey as well, what kind of bicycle facilities would people like to see and in what areas? So the active transportation plan, again, is a great resource and gets us most of the way there. But there, because of the new neighborhood center framework that wasn't around during that planning process, there may be some rethinking about this. Just in some places, it may be good as it is. But just a little intro, this is more of a shared street, or some people call it a wooner, where you actually can bike, walk, roll in a wheelchair, or be in a car in the street, and it's slow moving traffic and designed for that. That's something you typically only see in very active downtown, so it may not be appropriate anywhere, or it might be a quieter kind of thing, like more like a path connecting within a development. Bike lanes are kind of the traditional thing that you would see. There is also a big movement right now that if you put in a bike lane, you really should buffer it with a little bit of space to keep the car really away from the cyclist, and it helps a lot with safety. There's another thing you can do. You could imagine, so that what I just described with the painted buffer, if these bollards were not there, that would be what I just described. But then with the physical barriers there, that is a much safer way to get bicycles if they have to be on the same street as cars, especially if cars are fast moving or it's a heavy traffic street. Then this is what people tend to feel safest in, and is actually safer. And Christina can talk more about that in her group. So also in the transportation group, and of course, all these topics relate to all the other elements as well. But there is this sense that the railroad is incredibly important. And we've also heard that people would like to be able to walk around safely and even access the waterfront in some places. So where does that make sense? Where are the existing challenges? This was just one street that happens to go, that could connect down to the water from downtown. The bridge is a hindrance, or not a hindrance. In some places it physically blocks it. Here you can actually go under, but then you would have the railroad crossing and then commercial properties, I think, before you'd hit the water. So what are the challenges? Where is it important to cross the railroad and do that in a safe way? And then also under transportation, there's a number of other topics that we could talk with you about if you're interested in. What are the priorities for capital facilities like police, fire, buildings, or other facilities? Sea level rise, flooding, and tsunamis, and how do you invest and focus on that or prioritize different things there? We've heard a lot from a few of you about electrification and grid improvements. So that would be the group to talk about that. We also want to understand more about how the city works with the Grays Harbor PUD and what kind of opportunities could be there. The PUD is the public utility district that does electricity or provides the electric service. And then Lisa has also mentioned the location and service areas of new fire and police buildings. There could be discussion around that. And finally, the economic development group. This is where Sam and Nick will be. So some topics here, and again, crossover with land use, but what is really important to support economic development and employment areas? We also mentioned housing there, and Sam has mentioned the tie between housing and economic development. So, but especially the port, commercial zones, and downtown. What can really catalyze private investment, and maybe even in those little neighborhood centers, or the big opportunity areas in South Aberdeen, or well, both of the ones in South Aberdeen. And then how to leverage tourism even better than you already are. And then how we can react to the new levy coming in. And then, as Sam keeps bringing us back to it, attracting talent and diversifying the economy. So what are the big things we can do there? So that's what the groups will talk about. I am going to keep presenting for a little while. However, please take note here, because Ian has a little bit of a challenge to now set up all the small groups while I keep presenting. So whichever group you would like to join, please chat Ian in Zoom, and you can send him a direct message. If you happen to be on an audio line, or I don't see any phone numbers up here, or if for some reason that is not working for you, you can also text or call Ian. He graciously put his phone number up here. So if you know you're going to need that option, please copy that down before I move off of the slide. So the three groups are 1, land use and housing, 2, transportation, capital facilities and utilities, and 3, economic development. Would it be okay if I move off of this slide? Are folks generally knowing which number group they'd like to join in, and they can chat Ian as I keep presenting?
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. All right, so a little bit more from me, and then we can get into good discussion with you all. So again, the comprehensive plan is a 20-year guiding framework, can be even longer. And it's made up of goals and policies is really the heart of the plan, is its goals and policies. So just a reminder on what makes good policy. Clear guidance so that City Council, Planning Commission, city staff know what decision to make, or at least it's a little clearer than it would have been if there wasn't a comprehensive plan. When there's a troubling or challenging decision to make, they can look back to this and say, well, we have this policy and the community backed this comprehensive plan. So that let's follow this policy. We put this in here for a reason. They're understandable, easy to interpret, concise, action-oriented, and they're just really user-friendly. So they use plain language and an active voice, and they're attainable and feasible. So one thing we have to be really careful about is that we're not putting stuff in there that just really can't help. And we have Sam and Leland to really help with that. So we're not assigning, big city urban solutions where it's not appropriate. So the plan is made up of goals, which are your big picture, long-term vision, broad statements, and these ideally could last for 50 to 100 years. The policies get into a little more detail, and they're really what you look to when you're trying to make a decision. And they can be prescriptive or flexible when needed, and you can kind of talk about balancing different policies. And then the strategies and actions are actually not required in a comprehensive plan. We would like to include an implementation sections in each element, but there'll probably be just a few actions that are your clear priorities for the next few years. And then that's something that you can, when they happen, you can actually check them off and move on to the next thing. So that's something that you could update a little more frequently than your comprehensive plan, if that works. But it's something that's not required. And ideally, we would only identify a few really important ones. So working with the focus groups and city council, the focus groups was made up of, well, many of you all. So you all have directly created these via makers and the team. So there are six objectives that came out of the meetings and conversations that we've had so far. So balancing all of those, a unique Aberdeen identity. So that framework of centers and corridors should really speak to Aberdeen and the history that you all have, and the social structures that build a sense of community, identity, and mutual connection to place. That also has to do with your setting. Economic prosperity. So we want everybody to be doing well. Human health. So that means access to safe and comfortable exercise, ability to see friends and be sociable, and eat healthy food. So that means access to groceries in general, but can mean other things. Environmental health, and we've heard a bit about this already today, but stewarding the land that we have, taking care of it, and respecting the ecosystem functions that are here already, and using them to our benefit. Equity, so this means social equity and supporting life fulfillment for all Aberdeen residents, regardless of background. So anybody that's in Aberdeen or comes to Aberdeen can find success in Aberdeen. And resilience. So Aberdeen does have some unique risks, so making sure that those are considered. A risk that is not unique to Aberdeen is climate change. So that's one that's come up already in today's conversation. So also the whole comprehensive plan can be keeping resilience and all of these objectives in mind. So these are guiding principles that would land at the front end of the comprehensive plan, and all of the goals and policies that come to follow and the elements should all fit under this. If they're in conflict with these objectives, then they shouldn't make it into the comprehensive plan. And then the framework goals, these are some that came out of conversations, and I would also say are very unique to Aberdeen. Some communities have framework goals and some don't have this kind of thing in their comprehensive plan. But a unified vision, and this phrase rowing in the same direction, is one that came from one of our groups with you all. I can't remember anymore which one it was, but I really like that the comprehensive plan is what does it. It pulls it together for you all. Functionality for supporting our best lives. So supporting all the systems that make the city work and makes it, gives you all the ability to say life is good here. And that's another phrase that came out of the focus groups with you all. And it's people friendly. So that's mostly about the built environment. And that's also mostly because comprehensive plans, the heart and soul of the comprehensive plan is the land use and transportation elements. And so as long as those are working, then everything falls into place. So if it's a people-friendly built environment, then the other things should also fall into place. Regional coordination. So this came up a number of times in all of the focus groups and meetings with you all, but the efficiency and just that it is a major resource, the whole Grays Harbor region and the cities and municipalities and county utilizing that and leveraging that. And public engagement. This is one that does show up in some other comprehensive plans. And I don't think we heard it directly from you all, so I did want to check in on it. But the idea that when you make major decisions, community members are involved and heard and feel like they're a part of this and have ownership over this plan and major decisions that come up in the future. Okay, so Ian, do you feel like you got most people's chats?
I did not hear from Patty, Steve, or Pete about the room preferences. I'm happy to just throw them in the whichever room needs a person, but let me know if you have a preference.
Okay. So before we break out, and those three people can have a chance now to chat Ian if they'd like to. We do have a large enough group, so we will go through with breakout rooms. And we have facilitators assigned to each group. And so they will share the goals that have been drafted for each element. So they'll probably start with that. These are still drafts. And I will say, even every time I look at them, I'm like, oh, shoot, I missed something in that wording. So even today I was looking at it and noticed something, but we'll get to it. We'll get it in there. So the facilitators will likely share that and you all can react to that. And then we also have some discussion prompts teed up that are mostly what I presented on right after I presented the urban form framework map. So you all will have, you know what, my screens are kind of messed up and I actually don't see the time anymore. So if somebody will remind me what time we need to come back and then work backwards 10 minutes from there. And that's when we need to be summarizing.
7:15.
7:15 is when we need to be summarizing.
It's 7:05 right now.
Oh,
So
sorry.
you said 10 minutes.
I think, Rachel, you were looking for the end of the group discussions. So that would be
Yes.
7:35.
Okay.
So 10 minutes. So that doesn't give us actually much time, because I think we've gone over, because we were supposed to start at 6:40 and we're at 7:06 now. So.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was looking
Okay,
at 10
so
minutes thinking that wasn't a lot.
we're going to have small groups. So let's cut down our summary time to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so then does that mean that we're starting summarizing at 7:40? Is that what it means, Katie?
It would be, and then we'll have a report back after that, which we had 20 minutes for. I think we can maybe do that in 10 to give us,
sure.
if you want to give the groups more time. So yes, that would be about 7:40, I think. Yeah.
And if we're done early, do we just pop back in? Because some might be done very early, some it might not, might not need a lot of time.
Yeah, you can go back to the main room if you're finished early. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay, so we will, please facilitators, start your summaries with your groups at 7:40. And then at 7:45, we'll come back to the large group if you haven't already. And then we'll do a report out and another group discussion there and add on to what we learned from each other's groups before we let you all go. Okay, are the small groups ready to go, Ian?
They are. We've got some somewhat shy individuals who just left us, but everyone who's here is part of a group.
And just a reminder to facilitators also, if you could, during that little 5-minute summary at the end, please do check for the 2 most important things that each group member is most interested in supporting or seeing move forward.
Cool. And Rachel, I'll stay out here in the main room just in case anyone gets dropped or something.
Yeah.
And that's just let me know if you need to get back into a group or need to change group for some reason.
Yes, that's a good point. Ian is able to pull you out of a group and move you to another one.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Great. Well, let's go.
You may have to click a button on your screen to get into the room.
Hi, Pete. I think you got dropped off the call and lost your spot in the room. Are you there?
Sorry, I was muted. I got kicked out. I wanted to go into transportation.
Oh, okay, great.
Number 2.
Okay, do you see the invitation? All right, land use housing group, very prompt.
Well, that was just hard when you're the first one in and you see your face like right. It's the only it's like, oh my God.
Ian, did you give the other groups a minute or something warning?
I did not. Did you see my 5-minute message?
I saw it pop up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got a 5-minute
And I
warning.
saw you're kicking us out of the break room, so.
But it's interesting that the other groups haven't come in. Usually they get kicked in here and it is 7:46. Oh, here they are. It probably was like a minute warning at 7:45. And we were all early.
Really quick. Water.
You weren't kidding about just being sucked right back into here.
Here we are again. Does anyone need to stand up and stretch for a second? We could turn off our videos. Here, turn off your video, go stretch. Just for a second.
There's a giant chair in the Seahawks stadium.
Nick looks so comfy. All right, so I think we're now on to reporting out.
Oh, look at the puppy.
Your puppy?
So let me pull up the presentation again and share my screen. Let's see, should we go in order of the groups? I think we were number 1. So our land use group can go first. Lisa, I have my notes right in front of me. So you want me to list our main points? Okay. All right, so we had a small group. There was maybe, well, just 2 participants outside of Lisa and me. But the group was in agreement that where there is rail access, industrial and commercial should be a top priority. And that means that they are even okay if that type of land use over the long term extends into what has traditionally been residential areas. Even if that takes 100, 500 years. So that's our first point. And then second point, related, because there's no rail access and because the Corps, the Army Corps of Engineers, doesn't dredge the river beyond the bend or beyond a certain point, the warehouse property in South Aberdeen should be seen as a big opportunity site, waterfront, mixed use, residential destination kind of area. So I'll just put North Aberdeen opportunity site for mixed use.
That was on the south side, I believe.
South Aberdeen, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. I was thinking the north side of South Aberdeen. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. I was muted too, so I apologize.
And then another thought that came up in this group, which hadn't really come up before, was the waterfront areas south of downtown, south of the commercial areas extending between downtown and the port. It's kind of this no man's land and hard to envision what would go there in the future. It's not protected by the levee. It's on the other side of the rail. Commercial might continue to make sense there, but it again is not protected by the levee. So it's kind of risky even for businesses. So something like Rolling Hills, like a Rolling Hills Park, even if it's not that beautiful, it would be functional for protecting from tsunamis. Apparently Rolling Hills is a nice strategy for big waves coming in. So a Rolling Hills Park along waterfront. And then just full agreement on variety of housing types and focusing on housing. Anything I missed? All right. All right. I think the transportation group was next. So Christina or Katie?
Christina, do you want to do it? Do you want to recap? Or do you
I thought you were going to do it.
Oh, sure. No, happy to do it. Yep. I think you're right. I think that was my job. So great. So we were in deep discussion right at the end. So I will be first upfront that we didn't really do a really succinct kind of key points. So I would love to invite folks to jump in if I miss anything in this recap. We had a group of 3 other than Christina and I, and it was a great discussion. We spent a lot of time in the beginning talking about, we reviewed the goals and talking a lot about bicycle lanes and some agreement. There wasn't full agreement on where exactly where the bicycle lane should go, but but there was some discussion that the major streets made more sense for them, and then the smaller streets, there may not be a need there, but that there was a interest in from some of the participants of the main streets also providing that bicycle access. Some discussion around ways to rethink some of the streets, utilizing some that have medians to reapportion street space, think strategically about how we can better use the streets and the infrastructure that they have. Also some interesting discussion around parking and whether on-street parking should be just rethinking basically the streets that they have. And that includes not only where locations of bike lanes go, but where our on-street parking is located. And if there could be different thoughts, like a central parking lot to free up space so that there could be more street space for other more balanced streets. Some also discussion around some transit improvements or just providing a circular to transit resource so people could get around to key destinations in an easier way. There was some interesting discussion. Then we sort of jumped back to, we talked about the railroad at the end, so I'll talk about that now because there was also some interesting things around capital facilities. Recognition that the railroad is a very big challenge, but also an opportunity, especially in the key destination we talked about or key location, and that could be future improvement is the Broadway, and at the foot of Broadway, providing a better connection point to the water. And if there could be some sort of grade separated, safe access for pedestrians, that could be a potential opportunity to provide more circulation through the area. And that was a location we spent the most time in, but also recognition that this is a big challenge and there needs to be some more ongoing thought around how to sort of balance access in that area. In terms of capital facilities, I think there was an interesting conversation. One of the really key points I think that came out in terms of priorities, in terms of management and location of capital facilities was that the need to keep up with maintenance and not and make sure that stays on track so that in the future they're not digging out of a deficit and dealing with back maintenance. So not only is it the location of where facilities go, but just the need to stay on top of that maintenance. We did a little bit of quickly talking about location of facilities, and there's opportunities within that based on how each of those facilities are evolving, potential need for some satellite facilities in other parts of the city, particularly with police came up, and there's some changes in fire. So there's some changes around how the different types of facilities are evolving that will need to be addressed in the future, but the maintenance piece is really interesting. Those are the key ones that jump out, but am I missing anything that folks wanted to add?
Really quick, we did talk briefly about having better external access to transportation, like to other major points like Olympia, Seattle, that kind of area.
Good, thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? So I understand, what do you mean by better external access? You mean like Greyhound, something along those lines? Am I totally off my rocker?
Kind of, or expansion of light rail into our area, just so people that want to live here, because we have a really fantastic community to live in, but have a really good job in, say, Olympia, Seattle, Tacoma, these other really major cities, making it easier to commute to, back and forth, I think would, encourage people to live here, even though they're working elsewhere, and hopefully they spend their money that they're making elsewhere in here.
Thank you. I wanted to just make sure that I understood. So thank you.
All right, the economic group.
Okay, so we had Randy D and Liz in our group with me and Nick. And so we really gravitated to two central ideas, which was the healthy economy piece and the downtown focus. We talked a lot about the downtown as well as the port. And actually the port was the primary area where we didn't necessarily have consensus. But I think the consensus is that we need a lot more discussion around sort of the vision for the port, particularly around that conversation around expanding into the surrounding neighborhoods. So to that end, we took a sort of a regional approach and looked at the port as, you know, an important fiscal revenue generator and employment generator for Aberdeen, but within the region itself, there is a recognition that needs to be made of sort of the relative competitive advantages of Aberdeen versus sort of Hoquiam, Cosmopolis, etc. And perhaps there are not as great an opportunity to expand the port than maybe on sort of the mixed use in the downtown piece. So really focusing on the downtown as an economic driver versus the port, but recognizing its importance nonetheless. So I think that the mixed use and the housing piece was the piece that we really focused on as well. And housing by right is a massive thing that we should focus on in downtown. You know, we don't want to be basically neglecting any future housing investment if it requires sort of mixed use, for example. But we do want mixed use throughout the city. So flexibility is key. Flexibility is a big thing, both in the regulatory code and the comp plan, and just the sort of the general approach. In terms of catalyzing private investment, we focused on partnerships, tools, and incentives. Partnerships, I think, are different depending on different areas of the city and different land uses. So we talked about South Shore Mall for student housing and partnering with the college as a major opportunity. Also the hospital, looking at more sort of residential uses that could be oriented to healthcare workers, for example, you know, working affordability for kind of working class folks. And then on the incentive side, we talked about implementing incentives like an incentive zoning approach that may reward certain or desirable development types and you know, like affordable housing, for example. And that might be reducing the parking requirement associated with certain uses in, for example, downtown, and you know, other things as well. But also that incentives to attract new businesses are pretty critical. You know, there might be an infrastructure component that will be necessary for tech industry, and needing to incentivize the retrofit of buildings, which is pretty expensive. So tax credits bringing in outside investment. The one thing that did pop out that I thought was pretty interesting in our group was that the focus on downtown was more about new investment than historic preservation. So I think our group pretty much agreed that if a developer came in and wanted to build a new housing development, then there was more a focus on making sure that that reflected the charm and history in its design, and actually provided, you know, focused on the need that Aberdeen has for housing versus forcing a developer to preserve an existing building, right? So sort of prioritizing the investment if it meets the city's need. And yeah, I mean, there were a few other things, but I know we're at 8 o'clock now, so I don't really don't go too far beyond that, unless there's anything anybody else has.
Well, I'm not sure that I caught this point, and maybe it's because it was one of those where it wasn't consensus.
So, sorry, I just had a battery low. I think you just cut out.
Oh, sorry about that. I was saying, I'm
Okay.
not sure that I caught this point. We were talking about how the port is an important fiscal and revenue generator, but that in comparison with other areas, it might make more sense to focus energy and efforts downtown or focus job opportunities or employment expansion. I wasn't quite sure I caught what the point was right there.
So
I don't mind chiming in, Sam.
Go ahead,
I'll try and
Dee. Yep.
explain. The port, we kind of thought is a large unfinished conversation because the port's not at the table. How can we, as Aberdeen, decide what the port might look like? And why would we want to designate certain areas for them to do what? And so I think the feeling is that there's nobody's opposed to the idea that the port might require a bigger footprint, but what does that look like? And I, for one, said I don't really want to write a blank check in our comprehensive plan without the port at the table. So.
And there's a recognition that the port may need more land to expand to attract new businesses. But yeah, as Dee said, you know, at sort of what costs, a greater discussion of sort of the cost benefit.
I do want to add the port has been at the table for almost all of our focus groups. Randy just couldn't be here tonight, and Gary couldn't be here either. So, but they have been at the table.
I appreciate that because I was not.
Okay. Nick, did we miss anything? Okay. Anything from anybody else? We have a next steps, but then we can finally let you go. Enjoy your evening. Okay, let me go to the next steps. All right. Lisa, do you want to take this one?
Okay, so I'm unmuted. So we're gonna well confirm the plan concepts, but we're gonna continue to push the survey out. We'll wrap up tonight's workshop. We'll get the highlights out and get that publicized. We will. I'm gonna skip. I think that because the turnout wasn't as high as we had hoped tonight, I think we will hold one more meeting, and we'll do this maybe an in-person meeting at the blog pavilion to get that last bit in. So August, we're not going to get the draft plan done by the end of August. I'm assuming that'll come the first bit of September.
That's probably more realistic.
Yeah. And then I think that the whole idea is once the draft plan is out is to really mass circulate that and get as much feedback. People will have a little easier time looking at a draft going, yeah, that works. No, you didn't think about this, and hope to get more input. So at that community meeting, we could really get the last revisions in before we come with a semi-final draft out and get that done. But adoption process, we want to get that to council in November to do a full 3 readings of the ordinance to adopt the comprehensive plan and get that done by the end of December so that we're ready to rock and roll.
Hey, Lisa.
About the
Yeah.
survey?
I wanted to get word out about this workshop to a broader base of people that I'm in touch with, but there wasn't an easy, like a web link that I could copy and paste for people to go to, and trying to copy and paste out of your PDF didn't work.
Yeah.
So can there be a web link off of the city site that is really easy for folks to find?
Yes, it wasn't easy to find. And so tonight what I did is I have to put all of the information in there, but I created its own web page for comp plan update. And so it's under community development. And so we'll get all the documents into that hopefully tomorrow. But we will also have a link to that from the very first page so that they don't have to go dig for it. It'll be right there. Part of the challenge is trying to figure that out because we have to do our own websites, and I always forget how to do the link from the first page to the other page. So we'll get that figured out and get that done. But I did create the page, and we'll get all the information in there and make it much easier, as well as so the survey is available online as well.
What's the wrap-up date of that survey? How long do we have to encourage people to take it?
We like to give people 2 weeks, and if it hasn't been advertised very well yet, then I would say we should extend it for 2 weeks.
It's been advertised. I know we had it. It's difficult, but Greater Grace Harbor has also had it on their website as well. And I think one of the things we'd like to do is try to get it out in the utility bill. So I know that poses a challenge because the survey is online, and there's several people that won't take the survey online. So providing them with a written option was where I was thinking, since we're not, the turnout, surveys are difficult in the first place, but we'd like to get more. So we need to do some kind of a paper, whether it means me inputting what we receive back from the mail. I'd like to try to do that.
Quick question, Lisa, when you have the links up, can you send that information out to City Council via email so that we can blast it on, our social media, our networks, that kind of thing? And the other question is has the Downtown Aberdeen Association had any, have they put anything out? Because I haven't seen them mention anything about these workshops or anything like that. And that just seems like something that should be part of what they're doing for us.
They've been participating in the committees, the breakout committees that we've had to lead up to the public meetings. But no, I haven't, that's a good thing. I didn't ask them to do that, but I will definitely do that.
So I have a question. Everybody here's been burning their brains and taking this very seriously, working real hard to answer the surveys and answer the questions and come up with ideas, all that sort of thing. And I'm sure everybody feels this is an extremely serious, important issue that we're working towards the completion of. But how set in stone then are we going to be once we're complete with this? I mean, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to make adjustments and changes, I assume.
Yeah, we're allowed to update our comp plan as often as we want. So if we approve it at the end of this year and something major changes, we can amend it to include that and check things off. So we are able to do that. Since we don't plan under growth management, we're not regulated to once a year.
Very good.
And I've got a question. So for a town the size of Aberdeen, 17,000 people about, what would be a reasonable, what would be a typical kind of response rate that we could feel like we really got some good input from a broad base of our community? What would that look like?
Look at the voter turnout.
Yeah, that's what I was exactly where I was thinking. Honestly, Liz, I'd love to see lots of people respond. Typically, when we've done parks comp plans in the past, we're lucky if we get 100 people that will respond to a survey. And what I found with planning in particular, comp plan, is that, or zoning, people really don't turn out unless it impacts them in some manner. And so this is a long range plan. Sometimes people struggle trying to grasp what that is. it's not always easy. They're more nuts and bolts kind of, it's easier to grasp. So it's just difficult. It's difficult to get the attention. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I'd love to see thousands of people at least respond, but
I will say in most small towns we work in, we see about 300 people. Every once in a while, there's an Anacortes that has thousands, but not, most of them aren't thousands. And Nick, I would ask you a little bit too of what typically you see, but that would be for surveys. And so online engagement, it's easy to get a few hundred people. But I will say that for in-person engagement across the board, all communities we work in, it's hard to get people in person. We usually end up doing a range of small activities where people are already meeting pre-COVID.
Oh, that leads me to mention that this coming Saturday is the big gathering in downtown Aberdeen. I think people are meeting to roast Mayor Shave. Oh, no, wait a minute. He's sharing his barbecue handiwork with the rest of us. But
that is a perfect opportunity.
I volunteered to help out. And if Lisa had like a whole bunch of surveys that I could just go around with my clipboard and get people engaged and collect them, maybe we'd pick up a few more responses.
Or at least give them the information where they can join this survey.
I believe Lisa, I think Lisa has the web page up now. And so we can give them just a card that has the link to that, and they can take the survey digitally. And you could have a few backup paper copies.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it possible that we could do some paper too, so that those that maybe want to respond?
Very long survey. You would be printing a lot of paper.
Yeah.
So I would do it as a few backup surveys for people that really would want to do that.
So go ahead, Liz. Sorry.
Maybe I would have a paper copy with me so people could look it over and, oh, yeah, that looks kind of interesting.
We could set it up, Liz, so that you could be one of our manual entry people and you could enter it for them. They could, basically convey their information to you.
Okay.
Would be one way.
I was going to say too, we have the Aberdeen Sunday Market, which it does draw a lot of out of town folk, but a lot of our local people are going there, and you could always contact the board to set up a booth to just run a station to, collect information from people. I'm sure, you could, if the city has like some extra tablets or something like that, you could like direct them to, here's where the survey is. You can sit down right here, take it right here. If you have any questions, I'm right here. I can answer them.
Have restaurants or businesses used QR codes during the pandemic in Aberdeen? Sorry, we're getting into the weeds, everybody.
I haven't seen a lot of them. Most of them are still using their standard menus. But yeah, I think I've seen like one QR code menu in the area.
Okay, maybe hasn't. Yeah, maybe not then.
We opened back up quicker than most.
I see that some people are dropping off. So before anybody else does, I want to give everyone a big heartfelt thank you for all of your time. I know that a lot of you, as Mayor Shave just mentioned, that a lot of people have been putting serious thought into this. So I really appreciate that. And now if we want to get back to talking about public engagement, I'm happy to.
And by the way, Liz, the mayor, I heard the mayor's cooking his famous double cheeseburgers.
Yeah, is the mayor making those available to people who stop by?
Well, I'm not sure how they're doing it because of health department regulations and so forth, but
I don't think the health department will let you, unfortunately.
Right. I think they're just having samples, little pieces or something.
Well, I'm looking forward to this.
I can also say that the presentation that we gave tonight, we can hand you a copy of it, and you are welcome to share it with any other boards, commissions, homeowners associations, your neighborhood group, any place that you would like to. So you're welcome to take it and run with it. The survey covers most of the topics we covered here, but there are some, and it's easier to get more deeply into the discussion if you're actually conversing about it, not just filling out a survey. So you can take notes and pass them along to us, and we'll include it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Have a good night.
Good night. Night, everyone.